You're muted.
It's
Good to
recording.
go? Okay. I appreciate everybody showing up for the November 20th ASPE 19's monthly meeting. I apologize for the internet snafu with the link. The agenda, this is our third virtual meeting of the program year. This will be the last one for the fiscal, for the calendar year. We'll have another meeting in January, starting up January 15th. Just everybody keep that in mind and put it in their calendars. I'd like to make sure everybody knows who our board members are. I'm John Smith, the president of ASPE, Chapter 19. Everett Myers, the first vice president. Mary Rotter and her co-pilot over there, she's second vice president. Cindy Walker, our longtime member, is secretary. She's from Goderman Sable, so is Mary. Jim Stukenberg is our treasurer. He is retired. Jim, I think, is on the phone somewhere. Yeah, Jim's on here. And the directors are Fred Waltrip from Clay Pipe, Diane Reinke from Perry, Jason Emmerich from Hallmark Stone, Jeff Judge from C.E. Gerald, Kyle Hofer from Bazan Painting, and Cameron Beattie from Holland Construction Services. Just want to point out our chapters had 2 national awards last year. One was for the President's Award for Frank Kublik, who's a longtime member. He's a fellow. That's his 3rd time he's won that award too from the president. So it's outstanding for what Fred has done and Frank has done. So thought I'd just touch base on those. And then the Chapter Achievement Award, which I'm going to drag over here again, but that's the other national award that we're going to try to at least get a silver or get to the next grade. So other than that, Jason Emmerich, who's our guru here, was the estimator of the year last year, and we'll have a new estimator of the year this year for our chapter. We'll probably be voting on that here in the January, February meeting. Presentation this month. I'm going to skip over one part of that, Jason. I'm going to skip the board member presentation, which I'll handle here. We have chapter membership. We have about 39 members. It hasn't changed a whole lot. It's gone up and down from the 35, 39 to 40 numbers. Haven't seen any new memberships really come through. So I'd like to make sure that our board members are trying to reach out and get additional members in our chapter so we can reach out and get those individuals to help grow our chapter, not just people wise, but education wise. Again, if you have any questions about that, I am the chairman for the membership, and if you have any questions, I can direct you in the right place to get the information off our national website. For housekeeping items for the program, please limit your question. Don't hog the mic. If you could, send your questions via chat to Jason so that he can ask the questions of the presenter. Program should take about 20 to 30 minutes long. So it just depends on how fast Cameron speaks, is how fast we'll get done. Cameron, do you mind if we have questions during or after the presentation?
As we go.
Okay, good. Well, I'd like to get into the presentation so that we can get through that program. So I want to introduce Cameron Beattie. Cameron is a senior pre-construction manager at Holland Construction Services over in Illinois. He's going to speak about the pre-construction services should include, what they should include, and then why it's not free. So Cameron, go ahead and take away.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
We'll make this really short and sweet. It takes people and time, so should get paid for it. But Wikipedia, and let me just start out and say that this is I'm no professional presentation person, so if there's any questions, like I said, just go ahead and ask them while we're going through this. It says 10 slides, but it's really 100. But John said I had to take 30 minutes. Wikipedia defines pre-construction services are used in planning a construction project before the actual project begins. It's referred to as Precon. What I thought was kind of interesting is that they call it out as a modern practice. And it's considered to be a part of construction project management, overall planning coordination, from inception to completion. And then here's the really important part. From inception, aimed at meeting a client's requirements in order to produce a functionally and financially viable project. So this is where I think we run into a lot of challenges in pre-construction with people bringing us projects that are dreams maybe, and unfortunately we get to squash some of those dreams with reality. Or fortunately, depends on how you feel. In order to kind of get an idea about pre-construction, I think we had to quickly touch on some project delivery methods. The majority of projects that are out there are still being delivered with the design bid build model. And then you can see in this graphic below, and you'll see this graphic on the next slide as well, but just how much pre-construction is required for each of these different delivery methods. And obviously design bid build is the shortest, just because it's pretty much just estimating construction level drawings. I don't know how many designers we have on. I'm not bashing designers today, so. And then you have the design build model, which at the very bottom, you can see that requires the most pre-construction. And then we have the construction manager as agent, which basically means that you are a hired gun by I call it the hired gun by the owner. The owner usually carries the contracts with all the subcontractors, but relies on the construction manager to coordinate everything, put it all together. It's a little different model than what the construction manager at risk is. A construction manager at risk would also be at risk, hence why it's called at risk, of the construction costs. And typically we've done a GMP for a project, a guaranteed maximum price, and we're responsible and at risk to make sure that you build the project for that amount of money. And then there's an IPD and multi-prime, which I'm not really going to get into too much. It's the IPD that's kind of a kumbaya thing. It's been out there for a little bit, but true IPD projects are very rare. Owners like to say maybe sometimes that they're doing an IPD, but when it comes right down to it, they're out there, but they're kind of rare. So in pre-construction, there's certain design milestones, and they're listed over here, which is now the top of the chart down here. So you have planning, programming, which typically Precon's not really overly involved in. And then you got the conceptual. That's the first one that that contractors like to start getting engaged at. It contains basic information like, I want a 5-story building that's got 20,000 square foot per floor. And, if there's anything specific about it that you want, that would be a good time to get it in there. Not much detail, lots of risk. So when we're asked for a budget on a conceptual level drawing, you would see, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot through this, is the amount of risk that's involved in just not having the details yet. So there's usually larger contingencies or allowances at the conceptual level. And as you come down from conceptual to the construction documents, that risk should get smaller and smaller and smaller, which means that some of your contingencies should get less. Now, your allowances may still be out there because contingencies are money that's put into a budget for the unknowns. An allowance is money put into a budget for things that are known. Typically, like for an example, you're going to have to put flooring somewhere. We just don't know what kind we're going to put in this area. So we've got an allowance for that material and install. A contingency is we don't have a soils report, and we're concerned that the rock is weathered and that we're going to blow through it. So we need $100,000 contingency for that until we know that risk has been eliminated. Schematic level is just pretty much single line scale drawings. It's got some description of some major structural, mechanical, and maybe some envelope stuff. And then the design development is about the time that, so in some companies that are large and, that have very robust pre-construction departments, they may do their own estimating for MEFP systems. And a lot of times contractors will go to the subcontractors and ask them for some input and some pricing based off of design development drawings is about the right time to get those subs involved, and vendor assistance. So this is where you're starting to tighten up your budget, and your details are getting more and more known and put into the drawings. And then you have construction documents that are put out there, which would be typically they're done. Now the problem is there is no real standard. Like if you hit X, Y, and Z, you've gone from schematic to design. So what typically happens with designers is that you're getting certain disciplines that are further along than others, but that's just the nature of the beast. Although in pre-construction, an owner can basically come to us and say, I want to get into a GMP, and we can do a GMP at any point in time throughout this different levels. And all it's going to do is just change the amount of risk that we have. So the earlier in the conceptual, if somebody came and said, I want a GMP and all I've got is 5 floors at 20,000 square foot a floor, we could do that. It's going to have a bunch of contingencies and allowance money. And then then we get to make the decisions instead of the owner about a lot of stuff because we have budgets for it. And that kind of turns into a target design or a budget design where you're pushing the designers to design to a budget. So here's some of the services that should be included in a typical pre-construction services. You got to do the preliminary planning. One of the things here is the thorough review of the design documents. This is ongoing through pre-construction, and this is one of the things that takes so much time. Is you got to do page turns every time you get new set of documents from design milestones, and you got to identify what's changed and make sure that it's within your budget and what what the intent of the project's been. I'm not going to say designers put things in the drawings that, maybe they think should be in there, but you got to make sure that they're putting in there what you said the scope of work or what the agreed scope of work is. And you got to verify that it's in there and it's correct, and that there's not a bunch of other stuff in there that you haven't planned on. And then, of course, there's an estimating portion to pre-construction where, it's just how many and how much. And then, as part of that, you got to do a risk analysis, and then that's where your contingencies and allowances come in. You're developing a budget, and you're trying to manage design milestone drawing and budget variances. So what I mean by that is that when you do the thorough review of the design documents, as you go from one budget or one design milestone to the next, and you do those budgets, you have to track those variances and where those decisions came from, and are they truly needed if it goes over budget. And then it's kind of VE where you're given and taken. Maybe you save some money on one subject, but you're going over on another. But you have to be able to track each of those as a line item. And then we also help the owner through some zoning permitting. This is where we start developing the schedule. I talked about value engineering. Value engineering isn't always scope reduction. Value engineering can be scope reduction. It kind of depends on where the budget's at and what the owner is dreaming of building. But really and truly, it's like products or services, subcontracts that don't change the intent of the drawings or the building or what the owner wants. And some of this could include things like, can I do ground improvement for the building instead of doing a deep foundation? And does that save money? So that's an ag pier versus a drilled pier, deep foundation. Well, there's a lot of questions. If you bring that up, now you got to figure out, did the soils report get done? How much bearing pressure? How deep is the rock? You know, there's just a ton of questions that come up about that. So it may pencil, it may not, but that's a big part of what pre-construction does, is look at those things. And if you can save a few $100,000, it's for the owners. That's what they're hiring you for. This is why you get paid, or should get paid, for what you're doing. Life cycle costing, don't do a ton of it. And then the constructability review. So nobody has ever gotten a set of drawings from a designer that couldn't be built. I'm sure. Really, as you get involved from a construction company's point of view, and you're getting involved at the pre-construction level, and especially at like the conceptual level, then you can start doing constructability reviews on those drawings as well. So you can come to them and say, hey, you got this massive cantilever on this thing. That kind of steel on that's going to be very expensive, and it's going to take too big of a crane. The site isn't going to allow it. And, you know, it's going to cost a ton of money, and or it's just going to be, nothing's impossible, but it's going to be financially not viable. And then procurement. Okay, so here's some of the challenges that pre-construction has to address. Sometimes the owner does site selection. That's not really a ton of what we do. Project feasibility. So again, this is the owner that's bringing you the dream that he's had for a long time, a lot of times, and it may not just work. This is where we start to identify, or one of the things we do is start to identify equipment deliveries. So long lead items that are on our projects. When you have pre-construction involved early, you're able to identify what those time constraint materials are. And when you identify that stuff, that means you can get maybe a bid package out there early, so that you can get those shop drawings coming a little bit earlier, and you're able to accelerate that delivery of that material so it shows up on time, and then there's no delays in your project. So we don't want guys to look like this little dude on the right, where he's leaning on a pickaxe and holding the shovel and not doing any work. When we're on the job site, you got to be efficient, and everybody's got to be working, and they shouldn't be waiting on materials. And so that's the equipment deliveries and the procurement. We deal a lot up front in the pre-construction with utilities, underground utilities that are existing, relocations. As everybody on this probably knows, we have an 800-pound gorilla here in St. Louis called Ameren. And if you need Ameren to relocate services, that is a time-consuming process. So it is something that can delay a job, and you got to really pay attention to that. Plus, you know, there's all sorts of new regulations coming out from the feds about surface water management and and that kind of stuff. So we have to stay on top of the utilities. It is a risk item. It is a high risk item because it's so much unknowns as to what's in the ground. You can't just walk up and see it. So that is a risk area to pay specific attention to. And then as we were talking a little bit earlier before this, the permitting process during COVID, we've here in the last couple of months, I know 2 weeks ago, St. Louis offices were closed down. The city of St. Louis offices were closed down due to COVID exposure. And as people move more to a virtual setting, it's harder to get a hold of some of those folks. So where we used to be able to go in, sit down with them and work through issues, that's becoming a lot more challenging right now. And what, I mean, it'll get figured out. It's just that it takes longer than it used to. The value engineering, I kind of already went through. And part of that value engineering is cost saving options. You know, you're looking at different skin materials, maybe for a building and what you can do to save some money. And maybe it doesn't work, you know, but you got to put it out there. So, just keeping that, I mean, you're always evaluating different materials and different ways to skin the cat to try to save some money. You're looking at what the building material analysis is. It wasn't too long ago that lumber went through the roof. And so at that point, maybe you started looking at what would a steel frame building versus lumber, maybe that difference started getting a lot closer. Again, it goes to materials for like skin and things like that. Constructability reviews are just absolutely critical as you're going through each of these different stages of design milestones. And then of course it's the cash flow analysis or comparisons. Sometimes your owner comes in and says, okay, I could go lease a new place. It's white boxed right now. It's going to cost me X dollars to get it the way I want it versus staying in my, in my building and renovating it. And what's the best way to do it? I've seen a few of those as well. So some of the deliverables that pre-construction has, design documents, if it's a design build job, we'd typically be part of our deliverables. The project deliverables will have design documents no matter what. Project scope. So as the drawings are coming along in details, it's very important when you do a design milestone budget that you have it based on certain assumptions that are written out into a narrative. And it can be an outline form, or it can be however detailed you want to be, or not. It kind of depends on your owner and how much risk you're willing to put out there. I tend to err more on the side of clarifications as to what I've included in the budget. And unfortunately, not many people read it, but it's out there and you got to do it, because if you don't, you're really accepting a whole lot of risk and potentially angering your owners because they thought something was included in the project and then it wasn't, or something different was, and there's a cost impact or a schedule impact or both, and they get frustrated, and rightfully so. But that project scope narrative document is, you will go back to it all the time, and that actually helps you in laying out what your variance reports are, and as the construction documents get more and more detailed, that narrative gets smaller and smaller. So at conceptual level, it's a lot longer than it is when you get to it better be by the time you get to construction set of documents. Some engineering reports a lot of times will be involved up front with the soils, the geotechnical engineer getting soils reports done. At that point, we may look at doing some pre-drilling if we're going to go to go to depends on where the foundation drawings are at and all that, but you may go to a pre-drill for deep foundations just to make sure that the bearing rock or the rock that you hit at refusal is actually substantial enough to bear on. The basis of design, again, is kind of the scope. Site plan and site evaluation kind of falls into that same engineering report. Maybe you got to do a level 1 environmental study. And we're putting together the project schedule. So this is, at conceptual level, it's that schedule. To me, a schedule is a living document from day one when you get involved. And at conceptual level, even though there's not a lot of details, there is a lot of details about where you're getting in the pre-construction phase. So to me, that schedule is a lot more detailed on the upfront stuff. And then when you get to construction, it's not as detailed. And then as you get towards construction documents, that construction part of a schedule gets a lot more detailed. So when you get to the project estimate and the GMP, so you put together your bid packages, you divided the work up what you think is best for the market that you're building this in, because in different geographical areas, there may be little differences as to how subcontracting communities bid their work. When you put those bid packages together, having a detailed schedule to put into those bid packages will help you get better pricing, because when a subcontractor knows this is thought out, here's the schedule, here's what I can plan, then it does help get pricing. So the more information you can give the subcontractors, the less risk they have, then obviously the better pricing you're going to get. Risk contingencies. Contingencies, again, are what we don't know, and allowances are what we do know. And that risk is, it's evaluated. It can be done on a line item basis, or it can, sometimes you see, I'll use the example of the rock. I've got a line item contingency in there for deep foundations and just making sure that we're, bearing on the right rock. And then you see some people who put contingency on the overall project and throw a 5% or 2% or 0.5%, depends on your owner and what you can negotiate over the whole thing. I typically like to do more of a line item contingency because it's defined, and then as you get through that answer, then it can fall out into another area, versus just a overall. It just kind of is a big catch-all when you do the whole project, and then everybody thinks they own that money. Whereas if it's a line item contingency, then that line item owns those dollars. Because if it's overall, then the owner is saying, well, that's mine. And the contractor may be saying, no, I got to use it over here. And then it kind of becomes a point of contention. Options and alternates. Everybody loves to bid tons of alternates when they're out there. So, if you can, do a base bid with 500 alternates, people love that. We try to minimize that for the subcontractors, but sometimes it just makes the most sense. Permits and approval and cash flow analysis as well. So what are the real costs? Well, it's a lot. So Plan Grid defines, and I pirate all this stuff off the internet and kind of put it together. So don't think I just came up with all this stuff on my own, because I didn't. But they basically said pre-construction should cost between 1% and 3% of total project value. I'll wait for everybody to quit laughing, because it does cost that. You just don't get paid that. So for a $5 million project, you could spend up to $150,000 on pre-construction services. I would love to be able to bill that. The the reality is that full reimbursement of pre-construction costs rarely happens, if ever. It's just hard to get paid for everything that you're doing. Now, if you're a construction manager as agent, that may be a little bit easier. But if you're trying to be the construction manager at risk and do the, get a construction project while you're doing the pre-construction, that's going to be tougher just because it's more competition. So, if you go in there at $150,000 worth of pre-construction services on a $5 million project, and you're going up against 4 or 5 other general contractors, they're going to discount their rate way more than that. So it's something that you have to look at from a corporate standpoint, and what your corporate what your corporation wants to kind of present out there. Precon takes time and experienced people. Sometimes projects are in Precon for years. I would say most of the time. Lately, it's been years. I know, and this is gonna probably, make me seem old, which I am, but back in the day, and this goes back to the original very first slide where we did the definition of what pre-construction services, where it's a modern, something that's come up in modern times. But before, pre-construction was maybe it's 3 weeks or a month, and then it's out and it's gone. It's moved into operations and actual construction. Now that timeline has gotten so much bigger, and it just, like I said, it's taking years sometimes now. And you get what you pay for in your pre-construction services. So it's not just an estimating service. If you just want estimating, then you can just pay for that. It's, as I've shown in the previous slides, there's a lot more going into it. Studies have shown that Precon pays for itself to the owner multiple times. So if he's paying for it by project savings, then it makes the most sense. Not only is he paying for it, but maybe, kind of depends on how much, like we set up above, how much it's costing, but maybe he's paying for it 3 times over. And then I put this little slide in there for some of us old dogs. Former operations, project managers, senior managers, and directors, they may gravitate to Precon in their twilight years to use all their experience to set up projects to be successful. So general contractors or people that have worked for general contractors in the field tend to make really good pre-construction project managers, because they know what it takes. They've been there. So they've been burned. They've felt the heat on a few things, and they've made mistakes in their life and projects. And so when they're looking at a design level, DD level drawings, they can see what's not shown. And somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience in construction, that's fresh out of school, probably can't. And that's not meant to be an insult to them. It's a matter of experience. So the other part to that is that at being a senior level, you know what it takes to get a successful project, because you've had successful projects, and so you know how to set it up, how to get it that way, so that your company can be successful with these projects. And then I had the inexperienced part there at the bottom. I like this little quote here from Frank Lloyd Wright. You can use an eraser on a drafting table or a sledgehammer on the construction site. So it's a lot easier to change it while it's on the table. And that's where the pre-construction services being engaged at the earliest stages help with. Because every owner thinks contractors are like this dude on the right. We are not, as we all know on this call. That's not how it works. But so how does it get paid? there's a lot of different methods. But all those people in pre-construction and estimating to that extent, they all have to get paid. And so if you can pay for them out of your overhead and fee, or you can negotiate a construction fee that includes Precon. So instead of, getting, say, I'm just making numbers up. Maybe it's 3% fee that you would typically get. Maybe you can negotiate it up to a 3.8%, and then you're throwing in Precon as part of that fee. And then there's other ways we're starting to see where owners, when I say we're starting, it's again, because I'm old, but we're seeing where owners are starting to understand what the true value that pre-construction services bring to projects. And they do understand that it costs money, because before Precon was really a thing, they would pay architects and engineers to put together budgets, and they would pay for that. They understood that that costs money. And so now they're seeing that there's a real advantage for them to engage pre-construction early in projects, but they do understand it costs money. The difference is how you show that as a company. Do you show that as, I'm going to show you 100% of what those costs are, or I'm going to just hopefully get half of it and then use the other half as what I'm calling a loss leader? So there's a lot of general contractors who would say, I want the construction projects. If I'm getting involved at the earliest stages, I know what they are, what they entail. So there's a lot of advantages that you want to make sure you get that negotiated in there. So maybe you do give a reduced amount for pre-construction, but those costs are not going to be reduced. That company is still going to have full, people are still going to get paid. They're full of salaries and all that. So that difference has got to come from somewhere. And it typically would come from their fee or a negotiated fee. And then there's also some contractors that self-perform instead of just being a construction manager firm. And maybe they can help make up for some of that by doing some self-perform work as well on those jobs. I've worked for two companies. One that is a complete construction manager that doesn't really self-perform a whole lot of work. And then I worked for another company that tried to self-perform as much as they could. So it's just philosophies and what each company really is trying to be. And then there's that unicorn there at the bottom, the full reimbursement from an owner. And I had to throw a developer in there because we know that ain't happening. But if you can find that, that's a unicorn. All right. So in summary, people, I kind of went over this, but people need to get paid, whether it's through their overhead or from the owners, developers. And then nothing is free. And when it is, you should ask yourself, am I getting the best value for my time and money? If it's the Precon company, I think the answer is no. And you can see fixing a mistake costs a whole lot less when it's on the drafting board than when it's out in the field. And that's what pre-construction really, really tries to do, is to get a lot of that stuff worked out up front. And that's pretty much what I had. If there's any questions.
Anybody have any questions?
Let me unmute these folks here. There's probably a faster way to do this, but anyway, there he goes.
Cameron, one thing you didn't mention was intent. There's a lot of times when the architect has a certain intent, the construction person has to interpret that.
Hey,
Hey, Bob, I can barely hear you.
I say, one of the things he didn't mention was about intent. There's a lot of times when the architect or owner has intent and the construction person has to try and interpret that.
Yeah, and so construction people usually start twitching when we use the word intent. But what the way to help alleviate that issue of intent and what they thought it should have versus what the construction person did is in the project scope narrative that that you put out there with the different budget design milestones. And then you can go back. Everybody knows what those budgets were based on. And then when that first one comes out, that first narrative comes out, if there's any disagreements, you get it worked out there. So that way you've got a living document all the way through the project. So that very first budget estimate milestone, whether it's at conceptual or at DD level, whatever it's at, typically it'd be conceptual, is the most important. That first one is the most important because it sets the bar for the budget, but it also sets what the scope of the project is thought to be. And if there is an intent disagreement, you get it worked out at that very first one so that you don't have that compounding. And then you get down to the construction level documents and you're at polar opposites on different stuff. Good question.
Any other questions? Well, Cameron, if there's no other questions, I really appreciate your very detailed presentation and slides, like some of the characters in there. Thank you very much. Cameron even did not take the gift certificate that we give to our guest speaker, so we appreciate that, Cameron. I'll use that for my birthday. How's that?
Yeah. Go have a beer on me, John.
That's plenty of beers with that money. I do appreciate everybody. I'm gonna have some closing announcements here to make. Again, I want to thank Cameron and
Hey, John.
yes.
Cameron kept talking about him being old. You know, he's talking to Frank and Bobby and myself. We're just young kids, and he's already talking about being old.
Yeah, we know, Fred. That's you're a caveman, I know. I appreciate it. Closing announcements. I'd like to make sure everybody realizes that January 15th is our next monthly meeting. Then after that, all these dates are on our FTP site, which is at www.aspe19 St. Louis or stlouis.org. Jason, can you mute Freddie?
Yeah.
Sorry, Fred. Appreciate that. And then we're going to continue these meetings via Zoom due to the COVID-19. I'm sure that it probably is going to end up that way through the spring. Just wanted, I can't wait till we have our first in-person meeting. It'd be great. I'm sure it'll be a great event because everybody wants to see each other other than see these lovely faces of Diane and Mary and the Photoshops there. But we have a couple other things. Scholarships. We'll be going out for scholarships here after our January meeting. So if there's any individuals on this call and on any board members that know that there's a university or college out there, a trade school that does have a scholarship program, if you want to help out by getting that contact information, please send it to myself so that we can update that. We're going to be meeting in January at our board meeting on the 8th of January. We'll be issuing that right after that, probably issuing it January 15th, and we hope to get them back by February 10th so we can make our February board meeting and make our announcements to get this a little bit earlier. The other big fundraiser for this scholarships, which we gave out 5 last year, is our trivia night, which we're going to hold a virtual trivia. And our secretary of the group, Cindy Walker, is taking the lead on that. It's due March 13th from 6 to 9 p.m. and we'll hold it trivia night. We'll have some kind of a theme involved with that. We talked about our estimating academy previously. And I'm more the one thinking on this, we're going to probably have a potential fall 2021 or spring 22 event. And that all depends on a few things, COVID and our also ability to pull it off and get it very solid. So it could be a spring of 2022 before it really gets people involved, unless we have to hold a virtual again. So other than that, again, the next meeting is on January 15th. That topic will be legal issues of estimating and change orders, and Jason Emmerich will be the chair on that. We'll have a guest speaker who is an attorney. So hopefully everybody, we won't have any snafus next time with the internet issues. Apologize that. Other than that, if anybody else doesn't have anything, I'd like to let everybody go and get back to work on Friday and have a good weekend and good Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.
All right.